Hi, everyone. Today I'm excited to interview Steve Windsor. I was first heard of Steve actually on Chandler Bolt's summit that he did. And I was just stunned by the amazing fast writer that he is of both fiction and nonfiction books. Steve is someone who was in management at tech companies before finding his groove with writing, and maybe he'll share a little bit more of his story with that. And but he's actually him and partner Lise Cartwright have started AuthorBasics.com, and you can find more information about Steve and all of his fantastic thrillers and nonfiction writing books at the fiction you can find at stevewindsor.com and the writing books at vixen.com. So welcome, Steve. I'm so happy that it worked out that you could join us on the podcast.
Yeah, I love doing them. So let's mix it up. You can actually find. I'm starting to migrate all of the nonfiction author training stuff over to the AuthorBasics.com website. So
Okay.
I'm migrating them from Vixen Inc. over to Author Basics, and,
Okay.
and it made more sense to put them there. But I've been kind of busy rewriting, editing each one of those books in the series, and then adding a book to the series, and we're getting ready to package them up as kind of an author in a box package of all of those books.
Yeah.
Um, Starting with probably one of your favorites, if I look at your questions here, my author phobia book was kind of my tongue in cheek. We all have fears about becoming writers.
Yes.
And, you were asking about my story, and I put quite a bit of it in there of how it came to be. I don't know. I'll dive in. You tell me where you.
Well, sure.
Stretch.
Why don't we start with that, Steve? Do you mind just sharing your story? I think your story is quite. I mean,
It's
it's unusual, and I think it's inspiring for other writers.
and I think it's getting more and more typical where you're jammed in a cubicle for your professional technology life, or you're working for a company and they've kind of got you employee number 362.5, and you're lost. And I did that for 20 years in Silicon Valley, where I was an IT director, and just continual middle management, and I was accountable for everything, authoritative for nothing, and responsible for everything. And so it was
Yeah.
just it just kind of burns you down. Meanwhile, I wrote all the time. I wrote everything I could for that job, and people would have me rewrite their resumes, rewrite their reports, I just was. There's always been this writing theme, and I
Yeah.
would always write when I was angry. I would write out this long thing. It's hilarious because this morning I was Common Core bashing of the U.S.'s new Common Core teaching methods, and so I wrote out this. I don't know. I got up to about 2,000 words of to the principal of my daughter's school, and I was like, okay, I got to abandon this, or else I'm going to get them kicked out of school. So it's kind of like that. I write to find out what I want to say,
Yeah.
and we came back, and I would do technology companies for a while. Then I would get a payout from a buyout, and then I would go start a project on my own, and then I would come back to technology.
Yeah.
And so the last time I came back, I interviewed with Google and a bunch of other people in Silicon Valley, and it just wasn't happening. And so my wife ended up getting an ICU nurse job before I got employed, and it was kind of this. It just happened where I started taking over the management of our kids and taking them back and forth to school, and then I was doing all of the things that had to be done, and she was working, and so it was and finally she was like, well, why don't you go write? You always wanted to write. Why don't you just write? And I write a little story about it in Authorphobia, where she was just like, get off your butt and go write.
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, you can't tell me what to do. I won't do it because you said I have to. It was kind of one of those anti-authoritarian things. But eventually, I ended up down at a Pizza's my favorite coffee shop down here. Plug out to those guys. But I ended up at a coffee shop, and I started writing to myself, and I just said, okay, I'm just going to write. I'm just going to type stuff. I'm going to ask myself questions. There was this series of books called Conversations with God, and this guy wrote this and basically said he asked God questions. God gave him answers back. Now, I'm not a religious dude, and once you get done with about half of one of my books, you'll know that. However, the idea of
Yeah.
asking a real question and telling the truth to yourself appealed to me. So I just did that. I did that for about 40,000 words. And what that taught me was, number one, I could pump out words.
Yeah.
And I think what people don't emphasize enough the actual like process of being a writer. You have to put words out.
Yeah.
You have to make your fingers go across the keyboard as fast as they can and put out words. Now they could be total crap.
Yeah.
And they probably will be in the beginning.
Yeah.
But you have to get in that habit and mindset of pumping words, because you can't edit in things that don't exist.
Yeah.
And the more you write, the better you get. So I just took it as, all right, I'm a rookie. I'm just going to start writing. And I did that. And then I learned how to edit. And then I learned how to write dialogue. And my second effort, after I wrote that blather, which was just a bunch of, what are you doing with your life? Get off your ass and fix it, right? And after I wrote that, I decided I want to write fiction. And because I love fiction. I mean, I just love... To me, it's more like I can bury all of my opinions and sarcasm and viewpoints on the world inside characters without just going to a dinner party and saying, I hate Democrats or some crap like that, And then you go, oh, well, you need to go over there with those people. So I can bury that stuff in characters, and people say, oh, that guy's witty.
That's good. That's great.
So the first book, quote unquote, that I ever wrote was like 250,000 words, and it just turned epic on me. And so I wrote about 2.5 books in a 4-book series that I had planned, and then I looked at it all, and I said, "You suck." And I took it and I put it on my laptop, and I decided to go. That's when I decided to go to Chandler School, where I was like, okay, I'm going to go learn how to really market books, because I had published one of them and nothing was happening. I sold like one.
Yeah.
So I got into it that way. It was kind of learn on the job or on the job training. Just go. Mm-hmm. And my writing style is not most people's writing style. My writing style is go to a coffee shop, 5 a.m. when they open, and don't come out till 7, and pump out probably 10 to 15,000 words I can put out in a day like that.
That's amazing.
And that's how I write. I cannot write 1,000 words a day. I cannot write 2 hours before I go to work. I can't write. And once I get in the world, I don't want to come back out. I don't want to have to redo the mind work that it takes to get into a fantasy world in your head.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that every day. I want to do that for... I wrote my series about writing books called 9 Day Novel. And it was because the last fiction book I wrote, which was Faith, in this series that I now have, I wrote it in 9 days over Christmas. I just told my wife, I said, we got 2 weeks of kid vacation. I'm going to take however many days it takes to pump out the 90,000 words that I want to do for this novel. And it took me 9 days. And it was just 9 days straight. I would just jam myself in a coffee shop and do it. And then now most people are like, I got a job and I can't do it that way. Well, you could do it on the weekend if you didn't want to go to that barbecue that you think is more fun and writing, because that's the choice, right? If you want to be an author, the choice you're going to make is, I'm going to spend my time on writing, not on this other stuff. And that's it. That's the decision you have to make, because it's not a part. It's not a, maybe I'll get to it, or you won't get to it. It took me 30 years to get to it. You get to it when you decide that other things aren't as important as writing, and then you get serious and you decide that, okay, writing is about production, and in order to produce, it takes time. And in several of my books, I make this very point, which is, if a novel, a commercial novel that's 350 pages long, because that's kind of the sweet spot, ends up being 75 to 90,000 words, and you can type 1,000 words an hour, then you have 75 to 90 hours that you have to put in. You've got to go find them. And you can't skip that part. You can't skip the production part. And in order to get better, you have to do the production part several times. You have to go through it, and then you go back through it, and then you write a second book and a third book, and you're getting better incrementally. Yeah. And I even found that after I wrote the 4th book in this series, after I wrote all those other books, the other 250,000 words are just sitting there. And well, actually, there, probably more like 500,000 in those 3 books that I'm not even touching until I get time to go back and play with them. The ones that I have published right now, after 3 of them, the 4th one came out, and people were like, I love this book. And it took the first 3 to get to that one, where they were like, oh, this one is faster paced, it's shorter, it's more, the action happens quicker, I'm engrossed in it more, and subject matter aside, because people will agree or disagree with what you say, how you write is affected by what you've already written, how much you practice. It's all,
it's all related, right? Yeah.
Soccer, becoming a world leader, whatever, you got to practice at everything. Yeah. At everything. And what people don't understand is those people what authors don't get is they'll come into the school and, okay, marketing says you have a bestseller in 90 days. Okay, that's good marketing. Now what's reality? Reality is that the people you see succeeding have been doing it for about 3 years. And they've been trying to write and publish and make money for about that long. Yeah. The rarity of 6 months and I'm making 6 figures. That's just like saying somebody has to win the lottery. Of course they do. There's one person going to win the lottery. Is that you? Odds are maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe you're going to have to go to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's the message that I read a lot of books on writing and how to write and how to become an author that basically they weren't telling me mechanics. They weren't showing me how, what, where to write punctuation and dialogue and all of those things. And I finally said, you know what, I'm going to write a series of books. It's just no BS. It's just, this is the way it is, okay? There's a 4-part story structure to fiction. If you subscribe to that and you're not a pantser, then you subscribe to the belief that stories that have been told since Aristotle have a inciting incident and, then a reaction to that. And then they go through and you get to the hero runs for their life. If you watch any movie, once I learned the 4-part story structure, I started watching movies critically. And I was like, oh my God, it's just a formula. It's a formula over and over and over and over again. Okay, hero comes in, he's totally likes his life, doesn't want to change. Oh, boom, something bad happens. Katniss' sister, gets chosen for the Hunger Games. And Katniss now has to let her sister die or she's got to volunteer for the Hunger Games. 2 happy choices. Okay, that's exciting. Bam, easy to figure out. Then she's whisked off on a train, no idea what's going on, run for your life. Okay, that's part 2. Yeah. Part 3 is, I'm going to try to turn around and fight this system, but you're doomed to failure. So that's part 3. Part 3 is you turn around, try to figure out what's going on, and try to fight the evil, and you're doomed to failure because if you weren't, then the book would be boring. Okay, so then they turn around and fall on their face. Then in part 4, they go, oh, now I really know what I have to do, but they almost fail, almost die, and then they miraculously somehow win, unless it's a series, and then you kind of half win, and then you're in deep shit again at the end. So that's the formula for fiction.
Oh, I love that. I love how you nail that.
It doesn't matter even if you're in a romance, right? I'm in a romance. A guy, I like the guy. Oh my God, he's got a girlfriend, and I'm better than the girlfriend. And I turn around and he finds out something bad about me, and then now he doesn't like me again. And then in the end, I show him that girlfriend is not as good as me, and we run off happily ever after. That's one part.
Oh, that's really good. I like how you simplify that and make it really easy for fiction writers to figure out, right?
People don't like simply. People don't like simple. They want it to be, magic. Like only my MFA professor and I understand the magic, and the rest of you cretins, you need to stay out of here.
I actually like the simple. The simpler the better, because that means that even I can get it.
Authors do. Budding authors do. But I'll tell you what, the people who believe that you have to be bestowed with divine talent to write, they don't like that.
Yeah.
They don't like formulas. They don't like you breaking it down into easy to understand little bits and pieces.
Yeah, no, that's...
So I think that's what I did with my nonfiction stuff, because I wasn't finding help, so I went and wrote the help that I wanted. And I've found quite a few people that really like it. And occasionally somebody says, yeah, you know what, you don't know what you're talking about because you didn't go to MFA school like I did. And then I'm like, how many books have you read? Oh, okay, well.
Exactly. So, Steve, that's good. So now that you've talked about the 4-part story structure, I love it how you really simplify that. So, do you create story beats? Like sometimes I listen to self-publishing podcast, and Sean and Johnny.
Oh yeah, Sean Platt and the
Yeah.
repeat dudes. Yeah.
Yeah. So they talk about story beats. Do you do that too? Do you?
I created a tool that I basically give away now to authors to build my list,
Yeah.
and it's a 4-part story structure Scrivener template.
Yeah.
And it's basically a starter file
Yeah.
that has all the 4 parts of a story structure, including all the major milestones in a story structure. Now, I'm not the story structure guy. I'm gonna, Larry Brooks is the man. He wrote a book called Story Engineering. And he talked about all these pieces that have to be in a book. And I just scoured his book. And what I tried to do was make it a little more accessible, because I got a little confused reading his book, and I've read it like 4, 5, 6 times. So I won't say that I'm, even Aristotle did 4-part story structure. Yeah. So the structure is, and it's 3-act, 4-part story structure. Screenwriters know it, beginning, middle, end. They know where to put things in order for a story to make sense, pace, and keep people interested and give them a satisfying conclusion at the end. And that's what a story's job is. Really, a fiction writer is keep me engaged, keep me excited, make me feel for a hero, and then give me something I like at the end, because I want to be entertained. I don't want this to be, most times, I don't want this to be like my real life, which is, drudgery for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So what I do is I use that file, and it's my own file that I created, but I give it away, and I will say, okay, this is my idea for a story, and this is what would happen to my hero in this story. It's similar to this over here, but it's not quite that. So I'll take a bunch of different ideas and munge them up in my head and say, okay, this is what I want to happen. In my head, I do that.
Yeah.
And some people do mind mapping, right? They just start regurgitating, ideas. What I'll do is I'll say, okay, hero is in. Let's just use something close, right? Hero lives in Banff, Canada, in the nice little world, and everything is perfect until one day a grizzly bear eats their girlfriend. Okay, that's the inciting incident. On a walk in Banff, a grizzly bear eats the guy's girlfriend. Okay, and then I put that in the inciting incident. I go, now what happens to this guy after a grizzly bear eats his girlfriend? Does he go on a rampage against grizzly bears? Does he go on a vision quest around the world because he lost the love of his life? So that's my part 2, and I start thinking that. And story beats to me are. Story beats themselves are action, reaction. It's that simple. People are like, oh my God, what is story beat? I don't understand it. Story beats are simply this. As a story progresses, it's always action, reaction, and action again, and reaction to that. And so in an inciting incident is an action, and then part 2 of a story structure is the reaction to the inciting incident. What do you do after your girlfriend gets eaten by a grizzly bear? That's your reaction to that inciting incident, which is an action. Okay? So it's just action, reaction, and that's story beats. And yes, what I do is, in 4-part story structure, Larry Brooks calls them milestones, okay?
Yeah.
There's about 17 different pieces in a 4-part story structure that are action, reaction, story beats.
Yeah.
Okay? And so you can fill those pieces in before you ever start writing, so you know the direction your hero's going. So to simplify writing fiction, I know from here to girlfriend gets eaten by a grizzly bear, I have a few things I have to do. I have to introduce who you are, who the hero is, where they live, who they're around, what their life is like, what they care about, make you care about them, introduce something that's really important to them, and then kill it. Okay?
Exactly.
Okay?
That's true.
And so those things I got to do in part 1. I got to make you go, oh my God, his girlfriend why would you care if maybe his girlfriend is mean? Maybe you don't care. Maybe he got let out of a great, a horrific relationship because a grizzly bear ate his girlfriend. And maybe it gets investigated saying that he intentionally endangered his girlfriend in grizzly bear country, knowing by pouring blood all over her before they went on a walk that she was going to get eaten by a grizzly bear, and he wasn't. He was going to get away, and so that's how he got rid of her.
Yeah.
And he gets investigated now, and the police are after him. So, I think the thing I love about fiction the most is you can do anything you want. People say, "Oh my God, why would a boyfriend put blood on his girlfriend and make her walk around in grizzly bear country?" Well, maybe she is a very oppressive girlfriend. I don't know. You know what I mean? You're allowed to do a lot more in fiction, and you're allowed to go a lot more places. And I think that's what I try to teach people that I coach and talk about in my books is. And Natalie Goldberg wrote a great book called Wild Mind, and she wrote Writing Down the Bones. And this advice is out there all over the place. It is, you've got to rip off your filter. Stop worrying about what people think about you. Stop worrying about what they'll say about what you write, and write the crazy that's in your head. And that's really what people want to connect with. They want to connect with the real that is in your head. And if you just write safe, you're writing boring. And to me, whereas inside story structure, you are definitely going to milestones, and you're writing to places that you have to hit at certain points in time. In between that, you can get to that with all the crazy you want. And that's where people say, well, if you're just writing this too formulaic. And I don't agree with that, because I'll let my characters go anywhere they want to inside those boundaries. And sometimes I have to go and ripple the change ahead of them and say, well, if that happened, then this down here can't happen. So I've got to change that. And if I change that, I got to change these things. So I will let the story change within the boundaries of it progressing where it's supposed to go, which, setup and scene is the first part. Run for your life is the second part. Turn and fight and lose is the third part. Fight back, win, right into the sunset is the fourth part. And within those, I defy people to go through stories and find and not find those pieces. They will. Even Memento, which is like one of my favorite movies, which goes backwards and forwards. Did you see that movie? Where the guy,
no, I didn't actually.
He basically forgets everything about 10 minutes or 10 seconds of time, so he tattoos his whole body to remind himself of everything. So they progress from the end of the book back to the beginning by skipping it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But they do all the parts of the story structure in it as they go. And so that's a creative way to write so that it's interesting, but you're still following a set, milestone formula to hit plot points. And plot points are something that everybody agrees on, right? Okay, we got to have plot points. Well, those are just inside the story structure. And that's action and reaction story beats, right? Whether you call them beats or whether you call them plot points or milestones or parts of the four-part story structure, you're still outlining a story before you dive in and try to start writing it. Because pantsing it, and pantsers do it. Pantsers can do it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you have to you have to be really good to keep something flowing, not knowing where you're going from the very beginning. You have to, and still needing to hit all these points, right?
Well, because that's that really is what makes stories that we love, right? It's all these plot. There's a reason why it's that's really popular.
And dilemmas, right? Dilemmas that I love. What I love about the Hunger Games is it's so formulaic, and everybody thought it was so awesome. It hits every single last piece of the four-part story structure that there is, right on cue, on time. And Katniss is on the train. She's going to the capital city, and she's totally lost, and everything's falling apart at the seams. She has no idea what to do. That's classic part 2, run for your life. I have no idea what's going on. And then they give her 2 love interests, so she's all conflicted with that. So she's got this this undertone B story of I love these 2 guys, and I don't know which one I love more, but blah blah blah. And so it is just you can find that in every movie, and in every story really, because most movies are just adapted off somebody's book.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really helpful, Steve. I think that's going to be really helpful for, especially first-time writers, right? Trying to figure this out. How do I write a fiction story? I think that's going to be, I love those, 4 simple steps of story structure. So, I mean, you have these great books, the 9 Day novel, writing fiction, which, just the title 9 Day novel, that is amazing to me. But like, so writing fiction, how to structure and write your fiction novel faster, and you have these other ones for outlining, and the other one was the author phobia, and they're all so good. And I love how your voice really comes out in all of
Yeah,
those books.
right.
It's great.
I
No,
got,
it's really
I
great
got to move
because
next to you because I swear, I know. I'm like, I'll be showing you. Hey, look at this mean person that doesn't like me. I love people like you who get it, who totally get what I'm trying to say. Because it's one part, tongue in cheek arrogance, and the other part, let's strip away all the muse and mushery of this and just talk about what's reality of writing,
yeah,
and why people won't tell you about it. Why people won't just say, okay, this is the pieces to writing fiction, and here's how you do it,
yeah,
and here's how stories are put together. So what I try to do in those books is I try to be sarcastic. I have a sarcastic personality. I'm like, why are you making this so? Are you really trying to help people, or are you trying to show them how much smarter you are than they
okay,
are?
yeah,
I
yeah,
read a lot of books that are like that, right?
yeah,
I read a lot of writing books when I was starting that were like, you just tried to confuse me worse than when I started this book.
yeah,
I didn't get a thing. I feel worse off than when I started reading it.
yeah,
And so what I did was I was like, okay, let's just simplify every last piece of this,
yeah,
every last piece. I think my favorite book is the outlining book because Lise Cartwright and I basically story beat outlined that book as we were writing the book about it. We story beat outlined a book called Dixon Teen Witch.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And in that book, you could just go through and see the process that we took to outline a book. And I think I wrote like 6,000 words of that book in the outline.
yeah,
And to do it, I've got videos on my website about of the brainstorming session we went through, so you can kind of see that it's like 3 hours of video where we brainstormed this idea back and forth. And I like brainstorming with the other authors, but that's the same thing that happens in your head.
yeah,
Is you've got to figure out the points and the characters and what happens and why the world exists the way it is. And the outlining book is it's the best-selling book that I have. I mean, like, of the 4 writing books right
yeah,
now, it outsells the other ones 2-1, and it's probably because I just did it as an example. I just outlined and story structured a book that didn't
yeah,
exist before the outlining book started,
yeah,
and at the end of it, and I've still got to write it, but
yeah,
it's like it's already written.
yeah,
I mean, from an outlining perspective, it's pretty well written.
yeah.
Um,
No, I really liked that book.
and
That was really helpful.
and I liked the plot of it. Some of it was copying other crap, of course it is, but there's no new stories. And some of it was, and Lisa and I like monster mashup teen stuff, so we just put everybody in there. Just werewolves and teen witches and
Yeah,
just alligator. We put it in Louisiana, so there's alligators and swamp and dark and magic and voodoo and all kinds of stuff.
yeah,
But it was fun. It was a lot of fun, and I think
yeah,
that's what we're missing. I think that's what a lot of authors are forgetting to do. They start out with the, oh my God, so and so makes this much money, writing fiction. That's the wrong place to start. You have to start out with, I want to get excited. I want to write cool, exciting books for myself, and sooner or later, if I grind it, they'll start making money. There's a friend of mine, Rebecca Howard, who is online, and
okay,
she is a fiction author.
yeah,
And she's in a few of the Facebook groups and things like that. But she's been at it for 3+, almost 4 years, I think, seriously. And she's now starting to make 6, 7, 8, 9,000. You might want to interview her too.
yeah,
She's starting to make money. She's
yeah,
starting to make real money,
yeah,
and it's because she has just grinded writing fiction. She
yeah,
writes ghost stories and kind of true to life ghost stories, and then some of them are pure fiction. But she's a ghost,
yeah,
paranormal writer,
yeah,
and when you look at her in the forums and you hear her say numbers about what she's doing and making, you're like, ah, man, damn it, she's making money, and I need to do that. And then when I talk to her privately, it's like she's like, yeah, dude, I've been busting this for 4 years,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that's the reality, Instead, that I'll take a little license here. She's stated publicly that she's been broke and on the welfare food stamp routine in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And had to write her way out of it. And I think that's the other piece of this, of becoming an author, especially becoming a fiction author, that people want to skip that part where you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can.
No.
I'm not sure you can just skip it.
Yeah.
Because I think in the suffering there is where you're building. This is where, this is as far as I'll get into muse and mushery, I call it. But where you're building your craft, where you're building your skills of how to pace a book. Not only how to pace a book, but what is my first sentence of my book? How are my characters going to speak in dialogue? How am I going to punctuate that? Where do I put commas, ellipses, em dashes, quotation marks, internal quotation marks, and where do I put a dialogue tag such that people know who's speaking, quickly? How do I put action beats in? All this stuff. How do I do exposition? What's first person? What's third person? What's second person? All this stuff. Mm-hmm. It's really, a new language you have to learn in order to be able to communicate well in it. Yeah. And when I coach first-time fiction authors, I'm like, here's where you have to start. You have to start knowing your first book is not going to be awesome.
Yeah.
You're going to learn skills with your first book, and I don't think there's any other way to learn skills. You could go to a university and you could take classes all you want, but until you start putting your own words on paper or typing and punctuating it yourself, you're not learning. You're just reading.
Yeah.
You're not seeing the process. And when I get really going, I can make it so that self-editing my books are very easy, because I know where punctuation goes, I know where dialogue tags go, I know when to start things, where to leave them off, when to start a new paragraph, and I just am hammering. But that came from probably now it's about 1.5 million words worth of typing, and connecting the synapses in my mind to make my fingers do that.
Yeah.
Word one, day one, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
1 million words in, you do write fast. You do know where you're going. You do crank words, and they're better than word 300. Word 1 million is way better than word 300.
Yeah. Well, that totally makes sense. That's with anything. That makes sense, right? Like, I just remember practicing piano day in and day out. It's only when you keep doing that, year after year, day after day.
And then that means you got to love it, right?
Yeah.
You've got to love it, because when the money's not flowing, and you're the fourth day in a coffee shop and you're writing the fourth book in a series that's doing okay. I'm talking about myself. I'm telling you right now. My series is not taking off and selling a ton, because I kind of neglected it to go write the nonfiction stuff. And I've been doing the nonfiction stuff for the better part of 6 to 9 months because it was making money, quite frankly. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
The fiction writers know, and I've got to go back to it because I love to write that stuff, more than I do writing nonfiction. I just know that when people have problems to solve, they'll pay $3 to solve a problem. Yeah. Well, when people want to be entertained, you got to do a lot more to convince them that you're worthy of 12 hours of their time.
Yeah.
And so, and that's marketing, and there's certain people that have figured it out. You go look at Nick Stevenson, and he did a small series, and from that he's training people. And then Mark Dawson makes $450,000 a year on Kindle, and he's got 10, 15 books out, and now he's teaching people how to do Facebook ads. And so this is the progression becomes. Even fiction writers who get good at it go back to nonfiction to make a bunch more money.
Yeah.
And I think everybody just finds their niche. What works for one person won't work for everybody.
Yeah.
No matter what they say. The way I write won't work for everybody. But what I try to encourage people is find the way you're going to write, but you have to have a reason to write. You have to have the internal fire burning to write. And even if that fire is, I want to make a ton of money and have passive income off of it, well, guess what? You still got to write. You still have to write real and worthwhile stuff that you have some knowledge in. You could ghostwrite the whole damn thing, right? But you're a writer. You're a marketer.
Yeah.
You're a marketer if you're getting everybody else to write your stuff. You market well. So and people do that constantly. Yeah. And they make good money. But my soul says you got to put the words on paper yourself with your own fingers. and so that's what I do. And I think that, you know, that kind of boils down. I'm no BS in my books, and if I see something I don't like, I just call it, and I'm like, that's bullshit.
No, I like it that it's you and you just simplify it, which is really great for people that are first time writers, I think, right? Because that's exactly what you were saying before is that was the part that I found so hard when I first started. That's why it took me 8 years to write my first novel, because I kept getting confused. How do you do this again? And I
Yeah,
wasn't understanding what people were saying in the books, even though I probably should have got it, but I never
yeah,
did.
right.
So yeah,
And it takes practice. I think the reason I like to write so fast is I forget what my story is about 6 months into it.
yeah,
You know, if I'm 6 months into something, I forgot why these people are doing this stuff.
yeah,
And if I'm 10 days into it, which is how I blast out a novel, and I'll tell you, I'm not the only person in the world who does this. There's a guy who writes the Jet series, and it's a pulp kind of assassin series of books
oh, okay,
and his name is Russell Blake.
oh
Okay.
yes, yeah,
All right. So, dude, this guy, in all seriousness, he's making bank because he wrote 43 books in like 40 months or something. And then he wrote a blog post about that,
oh that's
about how he wrote
crazy.
43 novels in
Wow,
40 months.
yeah,
And no BS, right?
yeah,
And so I'm like, vindication. You know, 43 novels in 40 months.
yeah,
That's serious hardcore pacing. And they're all fiction ones, and he's at the top. So there's a subgenre in thrillers called pulp. And
yeah,
it's not pulp fiction the movies, it's pulp thriller fiction the genre.
yeah,
And inside there, he almost owns that whole thing with the Jet series. And I love that guy for it.
yeah,
Because he just cranks it. He
yeah,
cranks them out.
yeah,
And in doing that, I think that you don't lose your direction in doing it faster.
yeah,
And in order to do it faster, you have to know where you're headed before you start writing those words. And I think that that's where outlining comes in. And that's where, you know, when Sean Platt and those guys talk about story beats, they're really talking about outlining.
yeah,
No matter how everybody slices up the terminology, you are outlining in its purest form. You have to know
yeah,
what steps and what parts of a story structure you're going to go through, but you're outlining those. You're saying you give couple sentences about each one. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. This way. You get all the way to the end and you go, yeah, okay, that seems like a pure. You know, you're going to make it interesting when you write it.
yeah,
When you outline it, you have to make it plausible.
yeah,
You know, you're just there to say this would be a decent story if a writer, you know, wanted to go and write it. And I think that's why people get stuck when they're like, I don't know what story to tell. You know, number one, look at all the stories that are out there. That's why there are genres, right?
yeah,
That's why there's romance. That's
yeah,
why there's thrillers. That's why there's, you know, paranormal. It's a formula. Okay, we talk about werewolves. We talk about vampires. We talk about vampires that are sexy. Okay, you know, those are genre. They write them all the same way. You know, dark, handsome dude shows up in downtrodden girl's life, and oh shit, he's a vampire, and either she's got to decide to become a vampire too, or she doesn't get the hot dude. Okay, there it is. Start writing.
yeah,
And along the way, all their friends disown her, and you know, and he kills one of them on accident. And she has to decide whether that's bad or not. You know, so it's like, you know what I mean. You know,
yeah,
they're all. There's creativity in them, and
yeah,
yes, there are series that come out that are like, oh my god, that's monumental, right?
yeah,
But if you look at it and you broke it down, it's just romance, you know,
yeah,
with bad guy that's got tattoos. You know, that's what vampires are.
yeah,
Bad guy that got out of prison with tattoos but is hot. So, you know,
exactly.
right? That's what a vampire is, right? He's the bad dude that just got out of prison, and you know he's going to do bad shit, but he's kind of fun.
Maybe that's what makes it
Crazy,
interesting.
and he can do all kinds of cool stuff. There's that blood suction thing that I got to deal with.
Oh,
You know,
that's
I like to
that's
boil
good.
stories down like that,
Yeah,
right? You
yeah,
know, The Martian, okay? I haven't even read nor have I seen The Martian,
yeah,
the book The Martian, okay?
yeah,
oh, let's say we go to Mars because we're overpopulating the Earth, and lo and behold, the storm, blows everything away, and most people escape, and they think the other guy's dead. Oh shit, he's not dead. We got to go back and get him. Should we go back and get him? Well, yeah. Okay, now it's a rescue mission to Mars, and this guy is going to overcome all the obstacles, and la la la, and we're going to get him off Mars, or they're all going to die trying, and
Yeah.
So there's the story,
Yeah.
right? But in that, then the author has to write to make you care about whether we go back and get this dude off of Mars.
Yeah.
Right? Is he a nice guy? Is he an a-hole that we should just leave there? Maybe that's how you write it. That's how you write it.
Yeah.
They decide at the highest levels, nope, that guy was a pain in our ass anyway. Leave him on Mars. And then he creates a whole colony by himself by self-propagation. Who knows? So aliens show up. That's when in sci-fi, the alien shows up, he crossbreeds, make a whole new population of people, and they come down and enslave the Earth. You should have went and picked him up. See? You should have went and picked the guy up.
That's good. I like that. I like how you can just create a story just off the cuff. That's wonderful.
Well, yeah, because I think I've been teaching myself to think the way people are like, you can't say that. You can't do that. I'm like, yeah, you can. You can say and do anything. You just have to live with the consequences of what you say and do.
Yeah.
But you can say and do anything. You've been trained your whole life that you're not allowed to speak certain things in public. And I think in and of itself as an author, that's the first thing you got to learn to get rid of is I'm only allowed to say and do certain things in public. Well, book is not public. Book is your thoughts inside a book. So your characters can say, what makes characters interesting is this say and do anything. Yeah. Okay, did you ever see the movie Lake Placid, the first one?
No, I didn't. I feel like I'm missing out.
You should just have a pen and write down all these things you're going to have to go write.
I know.
Okay, so in Lake Placid, they had Bridget Fonda and a bunch of other awesome actors in it, and Betty White was in it, okay?
Oh, okay.
And I won't spoil it for you, but Betty White's character in this, she said whatever she wanted, and she just cussed like a sailor at the authorities when they were questioning her. She just, like, you were like, oh my God, Betty White just said that. And so you watch this, and you're like, and the movie's plot was just standard, straight up, horror movie, scary, gotcha thing, right?
Yeah.
But the real movie was all these heavy-duty actors and the sarcasm and swearing and sanctimonious attitudes that they had toward each other during the whole flick. It's a popcorn one where if you just want to listen to dialogue and see characters interact and just everybody's uncomfortable because they're all just saying whatever they want to say.
Yeah.
It was
That's
awesome.
a great one. Oh, okay, I'll need to.
Betty White is just like the superstar of the whole thing because of the way she cusses at them. It's just because you're just like Betty White. She's a golden girl or whatever the hell you can't. And yes, you can. So they did it, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
That's true. Fiction writing is totally about that.
So I had in my first book, my hero basically is not the greatest guy in the world, and he ends up, in a church with this priest, talking to this priest about they're going to try to forge their way into purgatory. Okay? Yeah. And he's talking to this priest overnight, and he's just sitting there, and they're BSing, killing time because they're waiting for the morning. All these other characters are sleeping. They're sitting there BSing, and he's like, he looks around the church, and it's just all this money it took, and everybody else is in poverty because it's the dystopian future, but the church has all this money.
Yeah. Right.
And he looks over and he goes, I never understood the difference between a whorehouse and a church. And he's all because when you walk inside and see all that glory, you have no idea which one you're at. And so he's like, he just says crap to people. He does whatever he wants. And he's surly and mean, but he's got a kind of code of justice where he knows what's right and what's wrong. And if you're doing the wrong stuff, he's going to whack you. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of characters out there like that where people are like, well, that's a mean, bad person. But those characters, people love characters that write injustices in mean, nasty ways because they wish they could do that in real life.
Yeah.
And
that makes sense. Yeah.
And the nicest people in real life can be, nasty little buggers in a fiction novel, and you can write them that way.
Yeah.
One of the things I do is take things that annoy me to death. And Andrew Vash, one of my literary heroes, who he writes a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, he was a child protection lawyer, okay, and he saw so much horrific stuff
Oh, okay. Yeah.
that he started writing fiction about it because more people would listen to the fiction. Because as a lawyer and doing this stuff, he wasn't able to like get the issue. It was '80s, people didn't believe in whatever was happening to children then, and he just wrote fiction about it, and it was raw, rough, horrific stuff.
Yeah.
And he was very popular doing it. But I watched an interview with him. He said, I got my point and my mission across to more people writing fiction novels about this stuff than I ever did in a courtroom because people just wouldn't believe me.
Oh, wow.
And so just, I think that is part of what the allure of being a fiction author is you can weaving and even, okay, even I hate doing this, but Stephen King, okay, because it's just like, la la la, Stephen King. And I hate that. I hate everybody that's like, I'm going to regurgitate some Stephen King for you so you know what you're doing. I'm like, gosh, darn it, stop that. Anyway, Stephen King. So Stephen King said basically, hell, I totally forgot it. But it's about writing the truth, and the truth is the truth is that fiction is closer to the truth, and nobody believes you if you tell them the truth, but everybody believes what fiction is.
Yeah.
Like everybody will believe that it's plausible to happen if you tell them it's fiction.
Yeah.
But if it truly, like, truth is stranger than fiction. I think that just boils down the summary. The truth is really stranger than fiction. And when you start delving into what the truth is, I was so scared when I started looking at the realities behind some of the research in my books. Yeah. So I researched this dystopian future for my series of the Fallen books, starting with Jump. And I started researching drones and drone warfare and CIA's involvement in psychological stuff. And when you start digging down way deep and you're just like, I don't want to, this stuff is too crazy. And as fast as I was writing, so I was writing before drones were becoming like mainstream in the US.
Yeah.
And one of my characters said, what are you going to do? Just shut down a multi-billion-dollar industry simply because there's no more enemy to point the bullets at? No way. You're going to go find a new mission for those things or a new enemy to point them at, because now that the billion-dollar industry is built, you will never get rid of them. And lo and behold, instantly drones started becoming more mainstream in the US. Like, we're going to run drones over everything. We're going to use Amazon's like, we're going to use drones to drop off packages, and we're going to use drones and now sheriff departments are using drones to surveillance people. And so I was just like, I let my wife read it, and she's like, well, that's just crazy. And I couldn't write it fast enough for it to happen.
Yeah. Do
you see what I mean? It was like, it almost looked as if I wrote it after the fact when I was writing it before the fact.
Yeah.
That's to me is the cool part about fiction, when you can really research in and tie in what people think would be ludicrous conspiracy theory with reality that's happening.
Yeah.
A lot of my stuff, I make this one point where people try to figure out what to write about and they can't figure out what to write about. I'm like, pick up a newspaper and make up some crazy thing. And you don't even have to make up some crazy thing, because I don't know whether it was 6 months or whatever ago. And I'm sure they have never figured this out. But the San Francisco police found a suitcase with a dismembered body inside the suitcase. In reality. Okay? This is reality.
Yeah.
So if you can't write a fictional thriller about that event right there, I don't know.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy to me. And people would say there would be no dismembered body in a suitcase. That would never happen. Like, yeah, it did happen.
Yeah.
So there's plenty to write about, I think. And I think probably where people say, I got writer's block. I'm like, no, you don't. Go out and just pick up a newspaper or go online and search for something crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. Well, and often, like you were saying, just researching something, because you'll have all kinds of light bulbs, go off in your head as that's what happened to me when I wrote even the second book now. But just as you're researching, it's, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's a great idea. I'm going to add that to the book.
Yeah.
In a different form, but it'll still be from that.
Exactly. And I think that's the fun of honestly, I don't know how people wrote stuff without Google and an internet connection when they were writing this stuff before. Because swear to God, I'm like half researching and writing. I'll write like as fast as I can, and then I'm like, okay, how would that actually happen? And then I got to go Google it and figure out how it would happen, and then stick it in the book. And so, and I agree with you, that process itself, and that's part of that training, where people say don't edit as you go. Well, what editing really means going back through and fixing sentence structure and plot points and all those things. However, you do research as you go. Otherwise, you're going to have to put a placeholder, say, do the research on what would happen to this person if this happened. And I don't do that. I just go onto Google. What would happen if this person did this in this place? You know. If you run naked through the street in Hungary, do you get beheaded? Is that what happens? So you got to go look. You got to go find out. And I think that's the fun part.
Yeah. All the research.
And as you can tell by right now, I get a particular, morbid satisfaction out of just shoving people's comfort zone, like just mashing on it, doing and saying things that you're not supposed to say.
Yeah.
And I like that. I really do.
It comes across in your books too, but your books are fun, so it kind of takes away any of the.
Well, like I said, I'm glad you're my fan. I love it. because literally, I'll tell you right now, there are some people who put some reviews on those books. They're like, you're just another ignorant. Somebody put my favorite. Okay, this is my favorite. Because it was early on, it was when the first book, and people were liking it, and most people were liking it, and then one person said, "This is the worst bunch of blather I've ever heard, and this author is exactly what is vile and wrong with the self-publishing movement."
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I was the epitome of why no one should ever self-publish a book, and I was just like, buddy, there's a lot of people self-publishing books. Anyway, that's I'm reminiscing to my and part of my book Author Phobia is I tell people how to deal with critics, and if you've never read Chuck Wendig, he's worse. He's crazier than I am. He'll write anything more than I am, and he's way more talented than I am. But his reviews, people will leave him scathing reviews because he curses incessantly, but he communicates with cursing, which I love. I love communicating with cursing. Yeah. But I say, if you get down about your reviews, go read Chuck Wendig's 1-star reviews, and you will be better. You will feel better after that. And if that doesn't work, then there's a method I use inside of Author Phobia, and if you've read it, you know what it is, and it's this little voodoo doll that I poke and drip chicken blood.
I thought that was funny.
You got to have fun. I think that's the part that people are missing out on too. You get into writing for fun, and you think it's going to be enjoyable. You find out that it's a whole lot of work. Well, you still have to keep the fun in it by writing. Keeping yourself interested in what you're writing.
Yeah. Well, and that's probably the key, because I can even tell as a reader if the author, it seems like they're having fun. I mean, obviously I can't, mind meld and go into their head, but, I can tell if it seems like they're having fun writing the book, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, it draws me in more as a reader.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And that will show when you see authenticity happening, and it's hard to say what that is.
Yeah.
But you can see when things feel forced, when prose and character dialogue and things like that feel very forced.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think there's so much that the basics can fix. Okay.
Yeah.
The basics of understanding where dialogue tags go, which ones to use, when to use them, there's a lot of them that I outline in my self-editing book, which is basically half of it is about how to write dialogue.
Yeah.
But new authors have a tendency to put dialogue tags of who's speaking way at the end. Like you'll be I went down to the grocery store. I bought 3 eggs, and I slipped on some oil,
Yeah.
and then this guy came up and helped me up, and he was the most gorgeous thing I ever said, Sally, right? And you don't know it was Sally talking or her friend Jenny until the end of that whole thing.
Yeah.
And what you really need to do is, I went to the grocery store, comma, quotation mark, said Sally, and then another comma, and then she continues, right? So now you've put the dialogue tag up front.
Yeah.
So that's one mistake I was making all the time in writing my first fiction stuff. You have to orient readers. Think of it like this: you've got a roadmap. In each chapter, you have to tell them who, where, and why you're there as quick as possible. In each sentence, you have to tell them who's speaking, or make it at least clear enough that the person is speaking much quicker than the very end of a whole bunch of dialogue or a whole bunch of exposition or a whole bunch of whatever. You have to tell them and that's what that's what we're not thinking. We're thinking it's all creativity. And no, there's a lot of this that is simply orient people to where they are and what's going on. And then you can get creative, because as long as they can follow pacing, they'll forgive some stuff. But if they're totally lost all the time as to where you are, what time period it is, who's there, who's speaking to whom, and those things are all basics that we forget about, and we're very guilty of doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, those are really great tips, because that's exactly what I did when I first started too. I do long pacing and dialogue.
4 lines of dialogue, and then who's talking, right? As